Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're tackling a language that might sound familiar, but trust me, it's full of surprises. Yiddish! We're going deep into yiddishinput.txt, exploring its history, its quirks, and maybe, just maybe, we'll figure out if a language can actually die.
Now that's a question Yiddish is almost tailor-made to answer. People call it a dialect, sure, but Yiddish has a story, its own journey over centuries and across continents that makes it something much bigger.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What makes Yiddish a language, not just a dialect of something else?
See, Yiddish doesn't just borrow from other languages. It's more like, imagine if a language threw a giant party, right? And High German's the host. But over here, Hebrew's hanging out, mostly from those old religious texts, you know. And then you got Aramaic jokes in the corner, a little Slavic spice mixed in, just a whole blend. And this all started way back in the 9th century, Central Europe. Can you believe that?
It's like a tapestry of languages, all woven together. And this was happening at the same time the Ashkenazi Jewish community was coming together, right?
Exactly. When we say Ashkenazi, we're talking about Jewish communities who first settled along the Rhine River. Eventually, they spread all throughout Europe, and Yiddish, that became the thing that held them together, their common language. Picture it: bustling markets, lively debates in the synagogues, families sharing stories at dinner, all in this vibrant mix we call Yiddish.
It's incredible that something born from these everyday moments could have such a huge impact on culture. And speaking of culture, we can't talk about Yiddish without mentioning its writing system. It uses the Hebrew alphabet, am I right? But there are some twists, aren't there?
You're sharp. It's not just borrowing an alphabet and calling it a day. Yiddish took those Hebrew letters and said, we're doing things our own way. For one thing, they spell out all the vowels, which Hebrew doesn't always do. So that made pronunciation much clearer, especially for a language spoken by people from so many different backgrounds.
Adapting to fit their needs. I like it. And speaking of adapting, I came across something called Webertouch. What is that all about?
Webertouch. Literally, women's speech. Beautiful script, really. Traditionally, women used it for writing letters, keeping their personal records. Some scholars, they think it might have been a way for women, often excluded from religious education back then, to engage with the written word, on their own terms, which is amazing.
Wow, almost like a secret code. A way for women to communicate and express themselves. Makes you think, what other stories are hidden in this language?
Exactly. And there are more, believe me. There's even a special typeface used just for rabbinical commentary. It's like a visual cue telling you, get ready for some serious brain food.
That's fascinating. Using these visual elements to add all these layers of meaning and history.
Speaks to how creative the language is, always evolving, always adapting for its speakers, but it also shows you how deeply connected language is to society, to history, to everything, really.
We've been talking about Yiddish's beginnings, but it's obviously more than just pieces of other languages, right? It's like a culture's fight to survive, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And like any culture, Yiddish has stories, moments of creativity, but also times of terrible loss. Remember we were asking, can a language actually die? Well, Yiddish's own timeline, that's how we'll see the answer.
Let's get into it then. We know it started way back in the 9th century, but when did it become like a language people wrote serious stuff in?
Think of it like we're linguistic detectives, yeah. The oldest clue we've got, it's just one rhyme, hidden inside a Hebrew prayer book from 1272. Finding that is like getting a message from the past, the very start of what Yiddish would become.
A secret message. So cool. What were those early Yiddish speakers trying to say? What stories were they telling?
A lot of poetry, songs, things like that at first about daily life, the good and the bad. But as Yiddish grew, it didn't just stick to small stuff. They started taking those big German epics, the Dukas Herant, that kind of thing, and turning them Yiddish. Not just translating, though, more like adding in Yiddish jokes, wisdom, you name it, till they were totally Jewish stories.
It's like they took those famous stories and made them their own. And then came the printing press, right? 16th century. Talk about changing the game.
Oh, for sure. Suddenly, it was like, boom, possibilities everywhere. That book, the Bovo book, super popular romance, written in Yiddish. Now everyone could read it. Writers like Elia Levita, the first Yiddish author anyone knows by name, they were capturing everyone's imaginations all over Europe.
So a whole literary scene, novels, the works. It really shows that Yiddish was thriving, not just everyday talk, but high-class culture, too.
You got it. And that influence, it just kept growing. Fast forward to the 20th century, early 1900s, Yiddish is having a moment. Bustling theaters in New York, Yiddish movies, even places where it was the official language. More than words, it was a cultural force.
Okay, so Yiddish is on top of the world. This is where it all works out. Happy ending, right?
Ah, if only. History had other plans. The Holocaust. That was devastating for Yiddish speakers, like an attempt to wipe out their whole culture, their very existence. Millions gone, and with them, who knows how many stories, songs, traditions, all gone.
I can't even fathom that kind of loss. To have something so lively almost extinguished is heartbreaking.
Truly dark times. But even then, even facing that, the spirit of Yiddish, it endured. After the Holocaust, some people just refused to let it die. Hasidic communities, Yiddish stayed strong there, a living language. And in universities, scholars, they dedicated their lives to saving Yiddish literature, the whole culture.
So even after such a loss, there was hope.
Absolutely. Yiddish's story, it proves how tough language is, how powerful cultural identity is. Nothing can truly erase that.
It's amazing to think about, Yiddish going from these little whispers back in medieval Europe to this huge cultural force and then almost disappearing completely. But like you said, the spirit of it survived. So where do we find that spirit now? Is Yiddish still spoken around the world?
Oh, absolutely. More than people realize, honestly. It's not just a history book thing,
Right.
It's hard to say exactly how many, but there are Yiddish speakers all over, from the U.S. to Israel, everywhere in between.
Like these invisible connections, right? Tying communities together across the globe because of this shared language, this heritage.
Speaking of unexpected places, what about that whole thing with Birobidzhan in Russia? That always fascinated me.
Birobidzhan, yeah, no, that is a story. Back in the 1930s, remember, things were really bad for Jews in Europe, lots of persecution. So the Soviet Union, they had this idea, this remote region, they were going to make it a homeland for Soviet Jews, with Yiddish as the official language.
So they were trying to create a Yiddish hub, like a modern-day promised land almost.
Exactly, a bold experiment for sure. It didn't really work out the way they planned, but get this, there's been a resurgence of interest in Yiddish there lately, the language and the culture. Shows you the power of language, how it connects people to their past, even in the most unexpected places.
It makes you wonder what other linguistic surprises are out there, just waiting to be discovered. But let's bring it back to the present. Yiddish might not be as common as it once was, but it's not stuck in the past either. What's the digital age done for Yiddish? I mean, has it helped bring it back to life? The digital world has been huge for Yiddish. It's like, boom, a whole new set of possibilities opens up. I mean, think about it. You've got Google Translate that can handle Yiddish now. There's a whole Yiddish Wikipedia with thousands of articles, even online dating sites for Yiddish speakers. Can you believe that?
No way.
Yeah.
So I can put learning Yiddish on my dating profile now. That's hilarious.
You absolutely should. But it's more than just dating, of course. Online, you've got this massive library of Yiddish literature, music, academic stuff, all at your fingertips. That's been so important for connecting younger generations to their heritage, building a community for people who love Yiddish all around the world.
Sounds like Yiddish is having a real revival, finding its voice again in this digital age.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just preserving the past, it's about evolving too. You see artists using Yiddish in new music, new literature, scholars using all these digital tools to study and understand the language in ways they couldn't before. It's an exciting time for Yiddish.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Yiddish, what would you say is the biggest takeaway? What can this language, with all its ups and downs, teach us about the power of culture, of connection, in a world that's always changing?
I think Yiddish shows us that even when things are tough, really tough, culture finds a way. Language has this power to connect us across time, across distance. And sometimes the most amazing stories, they're right in front of us, just waiting for someone to notice them. Yiddish is definitely one of those stories.
This has been such an incredible journey. And to everyone listening, if you've ever heard a Yiddish phrase and wondered what it meant or just felt curious about this amazing language, don't stop now. Keep exploring. You never know what you'll find. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Yiddish.